So we're going to have an election in 2008, and think about where things are. The Iraq War is going bad, we had Katrina, and then we have this terrible recession that spikes unemployment and leaves the financial system a mess. I'll go back to this chart of how satisfied people are with the way things are in America. Look at that number that's right, the lowest number that's like right at the end of 2008, right before 2009. That number is a 7. 7% of Americans are satisfied with how things are. Now think about what that means if you are the Republican Party. Right? You have been the ones who have mainly been in power for a while, and you're dealing with a situation where 7% of Americans are satisfied. That is bad news, and so it's not surprising that the Democrats win. What is perhaps somewhat more surprising is that winner is Barack Obama. In many ways, Barack Obama is a completely unlikely president. He was young, he was only 47, and had served in national office only since 2004, so he had very little experience, and he was black. And I think a lot of Americans in the run-up to 2008 did not believe that America was on the cusp of electing its first black president. No one before had really come close. I'll add that Barack Obama had a Muslim background. His name relates to his Muslim heritage. Now, he is Christian, but his dad is a Muslim Kenyan. I'm being somewhat flippant here, and I'm always hesitant to say this, but I think it's not, irrelevant. His name sounded foreign, and I'll add his name Barack rhymed with Iraq. His last name Obama rhymed with Osama. His middle name was Hussein. Right, and a lot of things that sound different and foreign, those things were true of Barack Obama. And having lived through the post 9/11 war on terror, it did not seem at some levels like things that a lot of Americans would. So despite being unlikely, Barack Obama obviously had personal qualities that made him an amazing politician. One of them is he is dynamic and charismatic and inspirational. He made his name as the keynote speaker at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, basically a nobody who sets the room on fire. And by 2008, he has rallies that look like this, right, attracting enormous crowds. Additionally, in addition to just speaker, there was his message. His slogans revealingly were hope and change. And think about those two ideas. Change speaks to this idea that America has been unjust in the past, that there's something wrong with the way these are. However, there's also this hope, a celebration of American ideals, and this idea that we could fix them. And so, yes, we need change, but change was possible. And there's a redemptive message that Barack Obama offered at a time when a lot of Americans were very unhappy with the status quo. I could say a couple other things in Obama's favor. If people were tired of the persona of George Bush, who was this kind of, shoot from the hip, go with my gut guy, Barack Obama is this very cerebral persona. The critique of Obama was that he was too professorial, and so he's a different vision for people looking for a change. And then I'll also add the fact that he didn't have much experience could actually prove a benefit. For example, he was not in office in 2003 when there's a vote on the war in Iraq, and that's where a lot of Democrats vote for Iraq, and that ends up looking really bad in retrospect. His chief primary rival, Hillary Clinton, in 2008 voted for the war in Iraq, and he could run as the guy who was anti-war from the beginning. So in any case, he has these various advantages. He's able to win in a pretty sound victory and ultimately becomes the first African-American president, which is a cause for a lot of celebration of a lot of people and a lot of optimism and idealism. That said, he goes into office facing a really difficult situation. He inherits this horrible economy that's in utter free fall, and there's a lot of anger at the previous administration, so he's off the hook there, but nevertheless, a lot of problems that need to be fixed. Now, one thing I want to make clear is that even before Barack Obama set foot in office, the Democrats and the Republicans had already agreed on a bipartisan bill to bail out the economy. And one of the major focuses here was to bail out major financial institutions. Basically, there are a lot of banks going broke, and the fear was that if we let them go broke, then the whole economy will implode as people have their money in these banks that are now failing. And so what the government does is gives hundreds of billions of dollars to these banks. It makes a certain amount of sense, though we'll also talk eventually about how a lot of people are pretty angry that the very people who caused this mess are now getting hundreds of billions of dollars. Additionally, once Obama got into office, there is an auto bailout. Basically, GM is really struggling. No one's buying cars, and so the government gives them a bunch of money. And then there's also a stimulus package, and this is passed under Obama with a Democratic House and Congress by now, by the way, because they swept in 2008. And it gives a bunch of money to spend on government construction projects. It extends unemployment benefits. It just flat out gives people cash. I think it did this by cutting the tax deductions from people's paychecks, but also sometimes gave people checks. I literally got a stimulus check in the mail. And by the way, I hope this kind of sounds familiar. In the wake of the coronavirus, like a lot of this stuff of giving money to big corporations that are struggling, giving money directly to the American people, a lot of that stuff happened there as well. One other thing that happens while Barack Obama is in office here is that the Congress passes new legislation called Dodd-Frank. And basically Dodd-Frank puts a bunch of new regulations on financial institutions to try to make sure that something like the housing crisis doesn't happen again. So there are these new regulations. There was that stuff that was directly responding to the Congress. The other major policy initiative of the Obama administration in 2009-2010 is what became known as Obamacare. Now, for context, the U.S. is unlike most every other wealthy industrialized nation in that we don't have a universal healthcare system. And so what eventually the Obama and the Democrats are able to pass, though it's really hard because it's really controversial, is something that comes to be known as Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. I don't want to get into the weeds, but I'll just briefly and really quickly go over what it does. One, it has a bunch of new requirements of health insurance companies, like they have to cover people with pre-existing conditions, which in the past they could just reject someone who had a pre-existing condition that made them look like a bad bet to an insurance company. It required most businesses to cover all their full-time employees. It was just a matter of law. You have to give them health insurance if you had more than 25 employees, I think it is. It also expands Medicaid. The simple version is, you used to get Medicaid if you had below this income level. Obamacare gives money to the states, so they'll cover up to this income level. So more people are eligible for Medicaid healthcare. It also gives subsidies for everyone else. So there might be people who don't get health insurance through their employer and aren't poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, but those people could get basically help from the government in the form of these subsidies to buy their own health insurance on these Obamacare exchanges. The final thing I'll say is that crucial for making this program work is that there's an individual mandate. That is, you have to buy health insurance. The problem is if you have all these ways to get health insurance easier, the main people who want to sign up are sick people. And then the insurance companies are in trouble because there's a bunch of people who are going to use their health care and then they'll be in a financial pickle. However, if there's an individual mandate where everyone has to get healthcare, even younger, healthier people, that can balance the risk pool for these companies. Long story short, bunch of regulations, there's a bunch of taxes to fund this, there's a bunch of new spending, and it's trying to expand healthcare access. Now, I mentioned because it's really important for understanding the backlash. In the next video we watch, we're going to talk about a lot of the anger that percolates in America in 2010, 2011. Some of it is about the financial crisis and the government response to it. And on the right, a lot of it's about Obamacare. And so that's going to be what I talk about next.